I was originally intending on making a separate video for the 3 Marvel Disney Plus shows we have been graced with, but time keeps on slipping, and I find myself pressed for it. With that, I think after having just finished Loki, I have some thoughts that I think translate pretty well across all 3. This will be kind of my review / essay / critique of Marvel's current phase, and my thoughts surrounding why I don't think they've utilised the medium of serialised television as effectively as they could. The most conceptually interesting of the shows was the first to come out. I was intrigued to see how they'd execute their idea, as in the past, Marvel tend to really water down their stories. Surprisingly, I think it delivered on most accounts. For the first half, anyway. While slow, I think initially WandaVision nails its pace and progression, and helps establish the eerie atmosphere that fills the void surrounding the sitcom we're watching. It's interesting seeing the episodes take on the different decades, and I love it toying with the audience on what is actually going on. Also, the title themes for every episode are excellent, and I'm glad they really went the extra mile there. My issues stem with the last few episodes. Once the sitcom gimmick is stripped away, everything becomes generic Marvel again. Unimaginative, contrived, and shallow. Everything it has set up gets washed away in favour of setting things up for the future, and kind of forgets to create a satisfying ending that is the culmination of everything that has come before. Wanda seems to come out of the whole thing scot-free. She hasn't learned anything, no revelation, well, not really anyway, and the other characters don't seem to mind either. In fact, the only people that seem to point out Wanda's flaws are the antagonists, which doesn't help that they're bland either and just fuel the dilution of any shades of grey. It's disappointing, because before the show started pulling its punches, it had a template for a really interesting look at grief. There are moments of goodness here. I think some of the flashbacks are much needed fleshing out of the 2 stars. Everything Agatha is extremely campy and enjoyable, and I really enjoyed the Vision versus Vision climax. The show needed a somewhat depressing ending. Maybe not No Country for Old Men levels of emptiness, but WandaVision needed to focus on the consequences of the show, rather than spending an overabundance of time with sword and setting up future storylines. The show didn't exactly end with me intrigued to see where they were going to take Wanda's character, which is a shame, because it started off the opposite. As with WandaVision, this show was the perfect opportunity to make me care more about Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes. As while they served the stories they were in beforehand fine enough, they never became anything more than simple side characters, and so that moment at the end of Endgame where Sam gets the shield feels completely undeserved. I am so happy the show acknowledged that. If this show got one thing right, it was exploring Sam and the aura and legacy surrounding the shield and what it represents to the people of the US. The exploration into the dark past of the shield was a much needed layer to the story which helped recontextualise Steve Rogers' journey as Captain America. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the show's ability to pull through on its ideas ends. This may take some time. This show really overextends its welcome, and forces characters in, that in theory do have a place in the story, but the show fails to justify their existence. Let's talk about Zemo. He was in this show merely to drag things out, and could have been removed from the story to no consequence. It's such a shame, because Zemo fit nicely into this plot about super soldiers, but the show doesn't do anything with him other than have him quit, wear a purple mask, and provide an excuse to bring the Wakandans into the story, which ironically fit in better than he does. Sharon is also there. The big thing though, is that this show doesn't stick with any of its ideas, and delve into them any more than surface level, which is stupid because if you're going to have commentary on your story, it needs to actually comment on something. And the whole notion of a character named Captain America is inherently political and ripe with ideas, but
I prefer the real
Captain America!
I said the real.
Captain America!
Perfection.
yes, you heard what I said. Walker deserves no hate, because people are so stupid they don't realise that he's meant to literally embody what an actual Captain America would look like. A strong, self-righteous, who does nothing more than be the government lapdog. and cares nothing more about the actual mission or why he's doing it, but that it gets done. And the audacity the people had to call him out. His character actually kind of survives the whole show development wise. It's just a shame that the villain plot was so boring that it ends up polluting Walker's arc. He's by far the most interesting character any of these shows have introduced, but his descent isn't utilised accurately to make him more sympathetic. Or maybe again that's just the audience being a bit daft. He is clearly broken, and clearly means well, but people hate on him because he isn't Steve?
Ironic.
I also want to mention that Sam and Bucky are never called out on how they essentially assist Walker on his path that leads to him murdering that one guy. They turn him away at every opportunity, when Walker is noticeably unstable and could have used the moral support. The show has the audacity to give that moment to Sam and whatever the bad girl's name was, but never one with the two Captain Americas. Mediocre. Then there's the show not sticking to its guns and calling Bucky and Rogers out for being a bit racist. Yes, I know what I said. Again. I appreciate the lengths the show goes with Sam's character and the acknowledgement on the injustices caused in the past and how we need to remember them, but not be held back by them. Everything with Isaiah is excellent. But the show is too scared to call out the other party, and is only willing to focus on the oppressed. I'm not saying that we need to have a scene where Bucky says the N-word, but the show has the audacity to have Bucky apologise on behalf of him and Steve for not understanding the weight or the background of the shield and what it meant for Sam, without having a moment where Bucky is called out for not understanding it. It's insane, and again, Marvel just likes to sugarcoat its bad storylining by ensuring only the end of the arc actually works, because then audiences think the story is amazing, even if it falls short in every other regard. And that's the biggest travesty with this show. It doesn't commit to any of its own ideas, and cops out simply due to them being too scared to actually say anything. It infuriates me because all the pieces are there, the story is set up, but instead of letting the game play out, they just skip to when the king is finally taken out, as if that moment is satisfying on its own. Spoiler, it isn't. The villain plot, Carly, I think, was so underdeveloped I can't remember a single thing about it. The setup for a story fits right in with the kind of things the show wants to talk about, but there's just nothing there. The show has the bare minimum scenes required to make me remember there is a bad guy, but there is nothing to make it remotely interesting. There are two possibilities here. Either someone pulled the plug on its commentary, leaving them to remove scenes and accept that they had an average plotline, or the depth was never considered to begin with, which is probably worse because it means the show never had an interesting plan starting off. The show overall is a blessing and a curse. On the surface it provides some much needed insight into the ideology of Captain America, but then fails to deliver on its themes in almost every aspect. Walker, Bucky and Carly were perfect to comment on the US, its thought processes, methods and politics. However, the show is either too scared or too stupid to explore it. Loki as a show was never something that interested me. The character had done his dash, and had a more or less complete character journey and had been in most of the MCU. A show focusing on him seemed completely unnecessary. Let's start with the good, I guess. This show was the most consistent of the three. It remains true to its core throughout, and while there are plenty of ups and downs, there isn't a lot of significant moments that are better or worse than others. Score is great, and definitely the standout of the three series. Honestly, other than that, and some perfectly fine visuals and standard Marvel dialogue and humour, there isn't a lot more to dive into here. This show is very surface level. Remember when I said I thought this show was completely unnecessary? Well, it is. This show does nothing to justify its existence, other than setting up the multiverse, except that could have been done any other way, and will probably be explained in the future movies anyway. It didn't need to be a Loki show either. Loki was merely an excuse to get people to watch it. While it's only 6 hours, half of that is just filler, and this could easily have been a 2-hour movie. Probably would have been better for it too. While Tom Hiddleston's performance is great, the character is so weird here. If it wasn't for the fact that there are other Lokis in this show to contrast him, I probably wouldn't give a shit. He's quite boring, and has zero agency, most of which is given to Mobius or Sylvie, who are the more memorable characters. The only memorable episode is the one with all the Lokis, because it's one of the only episodes that does something to stand apart from the others. Although that's where the zero agency Loki has really comes to a head. When this show ended, I didn't really feel anything, other than impressed that I've finally been hit with MCU fatigue and have little desire to see where these mediocre stories go in the future, even though, because it's me, I'm probably gonna watch them anyway. Consume. It's interesting, because I thought these shows would be a good opportunity, while a bit late, to flesh out the side characters Marvel really doesn't seem to care about exploring, yet forcing us to give a shit about anyway. I want to mention that since the inception of the MCU, Marvel has nailed their focus on making the characters consistent, fun, and interesting, and has arguably been the primary reason for the universe's success, even when the movies they're in aren't particularly good. But I think this has been the reason for Marvel fatigue in all honesty. While the characters are fun, they don't provide anything interesting beyond the surface level, which keeps everything feeling samey. It's becoming incredibly noticeable now, and it's much more apparent that everything is shallow. Of the shows, Loki and Falcon and Winter Soldier probably should have just been 2-hour movies. While they managed to stretch their content out, a lot of it could have been removed with little to no consequence. With a more focused narrative, and frankly, more balls, I'm sure those two stories would have been a lot more interesting. WandaVision is the only one that justifies its existence as a Disney Plus series. But in true MCU fashion, it can barely hold on to that, and the watered down consistency that led to the height of the MCU has further dug its own hole with it.